His hand closed over mine where it rested on the counter. It was a shock of heat, a sudden, firm weight that pinned me to the worn formica. My fingers had been drumming a nervous, silent rhythm, a habit I couldn't break, and his grip stilled them instantly. I looked up from the hypnotic swirl of cream in my coffee, my gaze snagging on the man on the other side of the pass-through. Julian, the cook. "Don't move," he said. His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the sizzle of bacon on the flat top behind him and the clatter of cutlery from the dish pit. It was a command, not a request. My heart, a sluggish and reliable organ, gave a painful lurch against my ribs. He leaned forward, his body bridging the stainless steel divide between his world and mine. The scent of him hit me first, charred onions, clean sweat, and the faint, sharp smell of the cheap, industrial soap the diner used. He wasn't looking at my face. His focus was entirely on my captured hand. His dark eyes narrowed in concentration as if he were assessing a piece of meat for marbling. Then, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to the inside of my wrist. It wasn't a peck. It wasn't chaste. It was a deliberate, warm, and shockingly soft pressure against the thin skin where my pulse was hammering a frantic, terrified drumbeat. For a split second, the entire diner dissolved. The chatter of the regulars, the tinny country music from the radio, the drone of the exhaust fan, it all faded into a dull hum. There was only the feeling of his mouth on my skin, the faint scratch of his 5 o'clock shadow, the impossible intimacy of the act. He lifted his head. His expression was unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality that was completely at odds with what he had just done. He released my hand. The place where his lips had been tingled, a brand of heat that seemed to radiate up my entire arm. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, as if he'd just confirmed something vital. Then he turned, grabbed a spatula, and with a flick of his wrist, expertly flipped a row of pancakes without looking at them. I sat there, frozen. My hand lay on the counter, palm up, feeling naked and exposed. I stared at it, at the pale skin of my wrist, half expecting to see a mark there. A burn, a bruise, something to prove it had happened. But there was nothing, just my own skin, my own thundering pulse beneath it. My life was a sequence of quiet, predictable loops. I woke up at 6:30. I drank 2 cups of black coffee while staring at the peeling paint on my apartment wall. I spent 8 hours illustrating technical manuals for a company that designed industrial-grade plumbing fixtures, cross-sections of ball valves, exploded diagrams of pipe fittings. My work required precision, a steady hand, and an almost complete absence of imagination. It paid the bills. In the evenings, I ate alone, read books I'd forget by morning, and went to sleep. The highlight, the one deviation in the gray landscape of my days, was my daily late lunch at the corner booth. I always sat at the counter. It felt less lonely than a whole empty booth to myself. For 2 years, this had been the rhythm of my life. I was a fixture, as much a part of the diner as the cracked red vinyl on the stools and the perpetually sticky salt shakers. I was known, but not seen. A ghost who paid his tab. Until today. Until Julian. He'd worked here for about 6 months. He was a stark contrast to the string of greasy, world-weary cooks who had cycled through the kitchen before him. Julian moved with a contained energy, a fluid economy of motion that was captivating to watch. He never seemed rushed, even when the order tickets were clipped 5 deep. There was a confidence in the set of his shoulders, in the way he'd rest a hand on his hip while surveying his domain of steam and steel. I had, of course, noticed him. It was impossible not to. In the quiet desperation of my life, a man like Julian was a forest fire. I'd engaged in the safe, sterile act of observation. I cataloged the details from my seat at the counter. The way a stray lock of dark hair would fall over his forehead when he bent to check the ovens. The intricate, faded tattoo that snaked up his right forearm, disappearing under the sleeve of his white t-shirt. The low, easy way he'd talk to Brenda, the perpetually frazzled waitress. These observations were my secret, a silent collection of contraband data. They were harmless because they were one-sided. He was a phenomenon to be studied, as distant and untouchable as a star. I was the astronomer, safe in my dark observatory. But with one impossible, inexplicable act, he had shattered the glass of the telescope. He had reached across the vast, cold distance and touched me. And now I didn't know what to do. My mind, so adept at following schematic diagrams, had no blueprint for this. I stared at his back. He was plating up a burger and fries, his movements sure and swift. He hadn't glanced at me again. It was as if the moment had never occurred. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Was it a joke? A dare from Brenda, whose lips were currently pursed in a tight line as she refilled the sugar dispensers. Was he mocking me? Did he somehow know about the way my eyes followed him? And this was his cruel, theatrical way of calling me out? The thought sent a hot wave of shame through me. My cheeks burned. I should leave. I should throw a $10 bill on the counter and walk out and never, ever come back. I should move to another town. I should change my name. My internal monologue was a spiral of pure panic. But I didn't move. I was paralyzed by a single, agonizing question. What if it wasn't a joke? What if it meant something? The thought was so audacious, so foreign to the barren landscape of my emotional life, that it felt like a fantasy. Men like Julian didn't kiss the wrists of men like me. Men like Julian had girlfriends who laughed loudly and wore sundresses, or they had wives and kids and mortgages. They didn't engage in cryptic acts of intimacy with the quiet guy who drew pipe fittings in his sketchbook at the end of the counter. My burger arrived. Brenda slid it in front of me with a thud. "Here you go, Leo," she said, her voice clipped. She didn't meet my eyes. She knew. Of course, she knew. She'd seen it. My stomach twisted. I felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. I picked up a fry. It was perfectly cooked, crisp on the outside, fluffy on the inside. Julian's work. I put it in my mouth, but I couldn't taste it. All I could feel was the ghost of his lips on my skin. All I could hear was the echo of his two words. "Don't move." A command I was still, impossibly, obeying. The next day, my entire body was a live wire of anxiety. The thought of not going to the diner was agony, but the thought of going was pure terror. What would I do? What would he do? Would he ignore me? Would he laugh? Would he do it again? The not knowing was a physical weight in my chest. I spent the morning mangling a diagram of a butterfly valve, my hands so unsteady that the precise lines came out wobbly and uncertain. My own body was betraying my professional mandate for control. At 2 o'clock, my usual time, I found myself standing outside the diner. The bell above the door chimed with what sounded like a note of impending doom. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the promise of grease and disinfectant, and walked in. I slid onto my usual stool at the far end of the counter. It was muscle memory. My body knew this path, this seat, this view. Brenda was taking an order at a booth, her back to me. I could see Julian through the pass-through, his head bent over the grill. He hadn't seen me yet. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my throat. I opened my sketchbook to a blank page, my default shield. I picked up my pencil, pretending to be absorbed in the prospect of a new drawing. It was a flimsy defense, but it was all I had. I could feel the heat of the kitchen on my face, smell the familiar scents. Everything was exactly the same, and yet everything was different. The air itself felt charged, humming with unspoken potential. Brenda finally came over. "The usual Leo?" she asked. Her tone was normal. Too normal. Her eyes, however, darted from my face to the kitchen and back again. She was watching for the next scene in this bizarre play. "Yeah, the usual." I managed, my voice a croak. She wrote it on her pad and clipped the ticket to the rotating wheel. "1 bacon burger, medium, fries," she called out, her voice loud in the quiet diner. I watched, my breath held. This was it. Julian turned from the grill. He plucked the ticket from the wheel, his movements economical and smooth. He read it. Then his eyes lifted, moving past the stainless steel shelf of plates, and met mine. My world tilted on its axis. He didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He just looked at me. His gaze was steady, intense, and utterly unreadable. It felt like he was seeing straight through my skin, past the bone, and directly into the frantic, terrified core of me. The look lasted for maybe 3 seconds, but it stretched into an eternity. In those 3 seconds, he acknowledged me. He confirmed that yesterday had happened. It was real. It was a thing between us, a shared secret hanging in the air. Then he gave a single, slow nod, the same nod from yesterday, and turned back to the grill. He slapped a patty of ground beef down, and the sharp sizzle broke the spell. I exhaled, a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It wasn't a joke. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't a joke. The shame from the day before began to recede, replaced by something far more dangerous. A fragile, terrifying bud of hope. For the next week, I lived in a state of heightened sensory awareness. My daily trips to the diner were no longer about food. They were expeditions into a new and uncharted territory. Julian became the subject of my obsessive, minute observation. I learned the rhythm of his breathing from across the counter. I could tell by the set of his shoulders if he was in a good mood or if the lunch rush had frayed his nerves. I noticed the small things. The way he'd wipe his hands on the clean white apron tied around his waist, his fingers long and capable. The small, silver ring he wore on his left pinky, a simple, unadorned band. The constellation of tiny, faded scars on his knuckles, old kitchen war wounds. I would sit and pretend to draw, but my pencil would hover over the page, my eyes fixed on the theater of his work. The rhythmic chop of an onion, the scrape of his metal spatula against the griddle, the low curse he'd mutter when a slice of cheese didn't land perfectly on a patty. He, in turn, continued his silent campaign. There were no more kisses. The gestures were smaller, quieter, but no less potent. When he'd pass my plate through the window, his fingers would brush against mine. The contact was fleeting, barely there, but it sent a jolt through my system every single time. I would spend the next hour analyzing it. Was it an accident? The pass-through was narrow. It was bound to happen. But it happened every day, and his fingers always seemed to linger for a fraction of a second too long. One afternoon, the diner was nearly empty. I was the only one at the counter. He brought my coffee over himself, bypassing Brenda. He set the heavy ceramic mug down in front of me. As he did, his other hand came to rest on the counter, just beside my sketchbook. His hand was inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating from it. "You draw in that thing every day?" he said. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken to me since "Don't Move." I swallowed hard. Yeah, for work." "Work?" he repeated, the word flat. His eyes dropped to the book. "What kind of work?" "Technical illustration," I said, the words feeling ridiculous and hollow. "I draw parts. Machine parts." He was silent for a moment. His gaze was fixed on my hand, the one not holding the pencil. It was resting on the counter, my fingers curled slightly. I had the insane urge to uncurl them, to reach across that small gap and touch his hand. The impulse was so strong it made my muscles ache. "Must be precise work," he said finally, his eyes lifting to meet mine. "It is," I whispered. "You have steady hands," he observed. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. And it was a lie. My hands hadn't been steady for a week. He held my gaze for another beat, then pushed off the counter and went back to his grill. I stared down at my hands. "You have steady hands." He was telling me he noticed me. He was telling me he was watching me, just as I was watching him. This wasn't a one-way street. He was an active participant. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. The game, whatever it was, had rules I was only just beginning to understand. The touches escalated, subtly. One day, as I was leaving, I had to squeeze past him while he was talking to Brenda near the door. He put a hand on the small of my back to steady me as I passed. It was a perfectly normal, polite gesture. Anyone could have done it. But his hand was a brand of fire through the thin fabric of my shirt. It wasn't a fleeting touch. His fingers pressed firmly, knowingly, for a moment before he let go. I stumbled out of the diner, my breath catching in my throat. I walked the 6 blocks back to my apartment with the phantom feeling of his palm imprinted on my back. My apartment, once a sanctuary of quiet solitude, now felt like a prison. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was deafening. It amplified my obsessive thoughts, the endless loops of analysis. I'd sit at my drafting table, the precise lines of a gate valve schematic blurring in front of my eyes, and all I could see was the curve of Julian's smile when he teased Brenda. All I could feel was the ghost of his hand. I started sketching him. Not his face. That was too bold, too incriminating. I started with his hands. I drew them from memory, over and over again. His hands holding a knife, the knuckles white with pressure. His hands flipping a pancake, his wrist bent at an elegant angle. His hand resting on the counter, inches from mine. I filled page after page. It was a secret language, a confession I could only make to the paper. My precise, technical skill was finally being used for something other than plumbing parts. I was rendering the curve of his knuckles, the shape of his fingernails, the faint lines on his palm, with an almost religious devotion. One rainy Tuesday, the universe decided to force my hand. The power in our small town was notoriously fickle, and a clap of thunder was followed by an abrupt, plunging darkness. The diner's lights went out, the radio died, and the hum of the kitchen fans sputtered into silence. A collective groan went through the few patrons. Brenda appeared with a flashlight. "Sorry, folks. Looks like that's it for today. The whole block is out." People started gathering their things, grumbling. I sat at the counter, a strange sense of calm settling over me. The sudden chaos was a reprieve from the internal tension. For a moment, nothing was expected of me. I was packing my sketchbook into my bag when a figure emerged from the darkened kitchen. It was Julian, wiping his hands on a towel. He stopped in front of me. "You walking?" he asked. The darkness softened the edges of his face, making him look younger. "Yeah, I live a few blocks over." "It's coming down hard," he said, gesturing with his head toward the windows, where rain was lashing against the glass. "Streetlights will be out. Let me give you a ride." My heart did a slow, painful flip. This was it, a departure from the script. We were leaving the stage of the diner and stepping into the unknown. "Oh, you don't have to. It's not far." The protest was weak, a reflex. "I know I don't have to," he said, his voice low and patient. "I want to. Come on. Let me just grab my keys." He disappeared into the back. I felt Brenda's eyes on me in the gloom. I couldn't decipher her expression. Curiosity? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. Julian reemerged, shrugging on a worn denim jacket. The smell of rain and wet asphalt clung to him. "Ready?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We walked out into the storm. The air was cool and clean. His truck, an old, slightly battered Ford, was parked behind the diner. He unlocked the passenger side for me, a small, almost courtly gesture that felt strangely intimate. I climbed in. The cab smelled of coffee, motor oil, and him. It was a small, enclosed space, a world away from the open counter of the diner. The drive was only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. The rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers was the only sound. I stared out at the rain-slicked streets, my entire body humming with a nervous energy. I was acutely aware of him next to me, of the space between my knee and his on the bench seat. He pulled up in front of my apartment building. He killed the engine, and the silence descended again, thick and heavy. I should get out. I should say thank you and run inside and hide. "So this is where the magic happens," he said, his voice soft. He was looking at my building, a nondescript 3-story brick walk-up. "Not much magic," I said. "Just plumbing parts." He turned to look at me. In the dim, gray light of the storm, his eyes were dark pools. I couldn't see his expression clearly. "I don't believe that," he said. He gestured to the sketchbook I was clutching in my lap like a life raft. "You're in there drawing all day? You're a million miles away. Where do you go?" The question was so direct, so personal, it stole the air from my lungs. No one had ever asked me that. No one had ever noticed I was gone. "I don't know," I stammered, which was a lie. Lately, I only went to one place, the counter at the corner booth, watching him. He was still looking at me, his gaze unwavering. "You're a quiet guy, Leo." "I guess." "I'm not," he said. It was a simple statement of fact. "I don't do quiet well, or subtle." He paused, and the weight of that pause was immense. Usually, my mind raced. What was he saying? He wasn't subtle. The wrist kiss, the lingering touches, they felt like the definition of subtlety, a campaign of covert operations. But from his perspective, maybe they were as direct as a thrown punch. Maybe, for him, this was shouting. A terrible, reckless bravery took hold of me. It was the rain, the darkness, the intimacy of the truck. "The wrist," I blurted out, the words clumsy. "Why did you do that?" He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I wanted to see what would happen," he said simply. "I wanted to see if you'd run." "I didn't," I whispered. "No," he agreed, his voice a low murmur. "You didn't." We sat there for another long moment. The space between us felt electric, a high-tension wire. I could feel the warmth of his body, hear the soft sound of his breathing. My hand, the one he had kissed, was tingling. Without thinking, I flexed my fingers. At that exact moment, my bag, which had been precariously balanced on top of my sketchbook, slid sideways. The sketchbook, heavy with my secret drawings, tumbled off my lap and fell to the floor of the truck. It landed with a soft thud, falling open. My blood ran cold. We both looked down. In the dim light filtering through the windshield, a single page was clearly visible. It was a detailed study of a hand, his hand, gripping the handle of a spatula. The faded tattoo on the forearm was rendered in painstaking detail. The small scar on the index knuckle was there. It was undeniably him. It was a confession in graphite and paper. I lunged for it, my movements clumsy with panic. "It's nothing," I said, my voice high and strained. But he was faster. His hand shot out and covered the open page, stopping me. His fingers pressed down on the drawing of his own hand. A perfect, shocking alignment of reality and art. "Leo," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He wasn't looking at the book anymore. He was looking at me. His eyes were dark, intense, and for the first time, I could read them. There was no anger, no mockery. There was just a deep, unnerving stillness. A profound recognition. "It's not nothing," he said. My face was on fire. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow the truck whole. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. I don't know why. I couldn't finish. There was no explanation that didn't sound insane, obsessive. He lifted his hand from the book, but instead of pulling away, he reached for me. His fingers brushed against my jaw, a feather-light touch that made me flinch. He didn't recoil. He just held his hand there, his thumb stroking softly along my jawline. "You see a lot, don't you?" he murmured. "I don't do things by half." And then he leaned in. It was slow, agonizingly slow. It gave me 1,000 opportunities to pull away, to turn my head, to say no. My body was screaming at me to run, to retreat back into the safety of my shell. But I was frozen, pinned by his gaze, by the shocking tenderness of his touch, by the terrifying, exhilarating promise of what was about to happen. His lips met mine. The first contact was soft, hesitant. A question. My own lips were numb, unmoving. My mind was a white-hot blank of panic and disbelief. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was. I could feel the warmth of his mouth, the faint, rough texture of his stubble against my skin. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He just waited. He held that gentle pressure, giving me the space to either reject him or meet him. And then, something inside me broke. A dam I had spent a lifetime building, a wall of fear and loneliness and self-denial, crumbled into dust. A shudder went through my entire body. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, and my lips softened against his. It was like a signal. The pressure of his mouth deepened. His hand moved from my jaw to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me steady. It was no longer a question. It was an answer, a statement. This was real. This was happening. The kiss was nothing like the frantic, desperate encounters I had imagined in my loneliest moments. It was slow and deep and sure. It was a conversation without words. It tasted of rain and coffee and a profound, bone-deep rightness that stunned me into silence. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not just observed, but truly, completely seen. The quiet guy with the sketchbook, the ghost at the counter. I was here. I was real. And Julian was kissing me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. When he finally pulled back, it was only by an inch. Our foreheads rested together. I kept my eyes closed, afraid that if I opened them, he would be gone, that this was all just a hallucination brought on by the storm. His breath was warm against my cheek. "You didn't run," he whispered. His voice was rough with emotion. "Nowhere to go," I managed to say, my own voice unrecognizable. He let out a low chuckle, a sound that vibrated through his chest and into mine. Good. The loss of contact was a physical ache. I fumbled for the door handle, my movements still clumsy and uncoordinated. I got out of the truck, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead in seconds. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just walked to the door of my building, my keys trembling in my hand, and let myself in. I leaned against the inside of my apartment door, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the storm still raging in my chest. I brought my fingers to my lips. They were tender, tingling. I could still taste him. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my sketchbook clutched to my chest. The power was still out. The only light was the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated my small, neat, and suddenly unbearable lonely living room. Nothing had changed, and everything had. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, replaying the kiss over and over, dissecting it with the same obsessive precision I usually reserved for my drawings. But this wasn't a schematic. It was messy and emotional and terrifyingly real. With every loop, the fear grew. What now? What happens tomorrow? Morning came, gray and washed clean by the storm. The power was back on. My clock radio was blinking 12 o'clock. I felt hollowed out, exhausted, and sick with anxiety. The kiss in the truck felt like a dream, a moment of madness. In the cold light of day, it seemed impossible. He would regret it. It was a mistake, a whim brought on by the storm. He would be embarrassed. He would be cruel. The thought of going to the diner was inconceivable. I couldn't face him. I couldn't sit at that counter and pretend nothing had happened. And I couldn't bear the thought of him looking at me with pity or, worse, with nothing at all. So I didn't go. I stayed in my apartment, pacing the worn floorboards. I tried to work, but the lines on the page swam before my eyes. I tried to read, but the words were just black squiggles. The silence I had once cultivated as a shield now felt like a punishment. Every minute that passed was another brick in the wall of my regret. I should have never let him kiss me. I should have run. By 4 o'clock, I was a wreck. The apartment felt like a cage. I had to get out. I wouldn't go to the diner. I would just walk. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, my feet carrying me aimlessly through the damp streets. And then, because the universe has a cruel sense of humor, my traitorous feet led me right to the corner of Maple and Elm, right to the diner. I stood across the street, hidden behind a large oak tree, and stared at it. The neon open sign was lit. Life was going on as normal. I could see through the large front window. Brenda was wiping down a table. A few regulars were in their usual booths. And through the pass-through, I could see him. Julian. He was leaning against the counter, talking to Brenda, a mug in his hand. He looked normal. He was laughing at something she said, his head thrown back. The sight was a punch to the gut. He was fine. He wasn't pacing his apartment like a caged animal. He wasn't consumed by a single, life-altering kiss. It meant nothing to him. The shame was so intense, it was a physical nausea. I was an idiot. A naive, lonely idiot who had mistaken a moment of pity or curiosity for something real. I turned to leave, to flee back to the safety of my anonymous life. But just as I turned, he looked up. His laughter died. His gaze swept past the window, over the street, and it snagged on me. He saw me, standing there, half hidden like a coward. His expression changed. The easy smile vanished. He straightened up, his eyes locked on mine from across the street. He said something to Brenda, then set his mug down and started walking toward the door. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. He was coming for me, to confront me, to tell me to get lost, to leave him alone. I couldn't face it. I turned and started walking away, fast. My heart was a jackhammer. Don't look back, don't look back. Leo. His voice cut through the street noise. It stopped me dead in my tracks. It wasn't angry. It was just his voice, calling my name. I turned around slowly. He was standing on the sidewalk in front of the diner, his white apron still on. He wasn't coming any closer. He was just standing there, watching me. "You didn't come in today," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact, but it held the weight of the world. I couldn't find my voice. I just shook my head. He took a few steps into the street, closing the distance between us until he was only a few feet away. Cars slowed and went around him. He didn't seem to notice. His entire focus was on me. "I waited for you," he said, his voice low so only I could hear. Those 4 words shattered my carefully constructed wall of cynical self-protection. "I waited for you. I thought." I started, my voice cracking. "I thought you regretted it." A flicker of something, pain, frustration, crossed his face. "Regretted it?" he repeated, his voice incredulous. "Leo, look at me." I forced my eyes to meet his. "I have been trying to get your attention for 6 months. The only thing I regret is that I didn't do that sooner." My mind reeled. 6 months. He hadn't just noticed me in the last few weeks. He'd been trying? All the small gestures, the looks, the touches, they weren't a recent development. They were the culmination of a long, patient campaign. I had been so wrapped up in my own loneliness, I had missed the first 5 acts of the play. "Why?" I whispered. The question was absurdly small for the magnitude of what I was feeling. "Why do you think?" he said, a hint of a wry smile on his lips. He took the final step, closing the space between us completely. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His grip was firm, warm, and unapologetically public. A car honked as it passed. He ignored it. "I'm not subtle," he said again, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand. "I'm just slow." He held my gaze, his eyes full of a sincerity that left no room for doubt. "I woke up this morning," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "and the first thing I thought of was you. And I felt good. Not scared. Not worried. Just good." The knot of anxiety in my stomach didn't just loosen, it dissolved. It was replaced by a warmth that spread through my entire body, a feeling so foreign and so welcome it almost brought tears to my eyes. Relief. It was the relief of a man who had been holding his breath for his entire life and had finally been given permission to exhale. Brenda was watching us through the window, her expression a mixture of exasperation and something that looked suspiciously like a smile. I didn't care. Let her watch. Let the whole town watch. "My shift ends in an hour," Julian said, his eyes still locked on mine. "Don't go home. Wait for me." It was a choice. A clear, definitive fork in the road of my life. I could retreat back to my quiet apartment, back to my predictable loops, back to being a ghost. Or I could stay. I could wait. I could step into this terrifying, beautiful, unknown world he was offering me. I looked down at our joined hands. His hand was strong and calloused. Mine was pale and smooth. They looked strange together. They looked right. I took a breath, and for the first time, it felt like my own. "Okay," I said. The hour I spent waiting was the longest and shortest of my life. I didn't go back into the diner. That felt like retreating to the past. Instead, I walked to the small park 2 blocks away and sat on a bench, my sketchbook unopened in my lap. The world seemed brighter, the colors more saturated. The chirping of sparrows in the trees sounded like a symphony. I felt raw, exposed, and ridiculously, stupidly happy. I was so lost in my own head that I didn't hear him approach. I only knew he was there when his shadow fell over me. I looked up. He had changed out of his work whites and was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked younger, more relaxed. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. He held one out to me. "Thought you might need this," he said. I took it, our fingers brushing. This time, the jolt was familiar. "Welcome." "Thanks." He didn't sit on the other end of the bench. He sat right next to me, our shoulders and knees touching. The casual proximity sent a fresh wave of warmth through me. We sat in silence for a few minutes, drinking our coffee, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the leaves. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was comfortable, easy, a silence filled with everything that didn't need to be said. "So," he said finally, turning to look at me. "Technical illustrator." I winced. "It sounds even more boring when you say it." He chuckled. "I don't know. Seems to require a lot of focus." His eyes twinkled. "A lot of attention to detail." I felt my cheeks heat up, but for the first time, it wasn't from shame. "Sometimes." "I bet," he said. He took a sip of his coffee. "You know, for a guy who draws pipes for a living, you make a mean-looking hand." I laughed. A real, actual laugh. The sound felt rusty in my own ears. "Practice," I said. "I'll bet," he said again, his smile widening. He leaned back on the bench, stretching his arm along the back, his fingers resting just inches from my shoulder. "I close up the diner on Wednesdays. We could go somewhere that doesn't smell like bacon." It was an offer, a plan, a future, even if it was just a few days away. It was a tangible thing I could hold on to. "I'd like that," I said, and the sincerity in my own voice surprised me. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a simple, unvarnished desire. He nodded, satisfied. "Good." We finished our coffee. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The park grew quiet as people headed home for dinner. But we stayed. There was no rush. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. He took my empty cup and set it on the ground next to his. Then he turned to me, his expression serious again. "Leo," he said, his voice soft. "This us. I'm not playing a game. I want you to know that." "I know," I said. And I did. I had spent so much time analyzing, overthinking, trying to decipher his motives. But the truth was simple. It was right here, sitting next to me. It was in the warmth of his thigh pressed against mine, in the earnestness of his gaze, in the way he said my name. His arm, which had been resting on the back of the bench, moved. His hand settled on my shoulder, his thumb stroking the side of my neck. The touch was possessive, gentle, and deeply reassuring. "Can I ask you something?" he murmured. "Anything." "That first day," he said. He gestured vaguely toward his own wrist. "What did you think?" I thought about it for a moment, replaying that shocking, world-altering moment at the counter. The fear, the confusion, the shame. But underneath it all, what was the first, truest feeling? "Honestly," I said, my first thought was, again. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Yeah, I confirmed, a matching smile finding its way to my own lips. He leaned in, just as he had in the truck. But this time there was no rain, no darkness, no panic. There was just the warm glow of the setting sun and the quiet certainty of the moment. He kissed me, and it was even better than the first time. It was a kiss of homecoming. A kiss that said, "Here you are. I've been waiting." When he pulled away, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I could feel the smile still on his lips. I looked at this man, this confident, patient, surprising man who had seen me when I felt invisible. He had reached across the counter and pulled me out of my gray, lonely world and into his, a world of warmth and sizzle and shocking, beautiful color. My life of quiet observation was over. From now on, I would be a participant. I reached up and laced my fingers through his, my hand finally finding its home. He squeezed it gently. The fear was gone. The loneliness was a distant echo. All that was left was a quiet, profound sense of peace. It felt like coming home. It felt like the beginning of everything.